I've made it very clear that I identify as a liberal, or I guess more specifically, a progressive. So I'm someone that generally goes along with liberal ideas, but I don't have a persuasion toward the Democratic Party. And I think one of the benefits of not really feeling inclined to support either one, say a little Dirk, um, is that I can more often than not objectively look at a politician from either party or a third party and say, wow, that's actually a person who I really like, or that is better than most of their contemporaries. And that's the case with the person we're going to talk about today. So before we discuss Thomas Massie's career in the House, I thought we should go into his background. He was from Huntington, West Virginia. Grew up in Vanceburg, Kentucky. That's where he met his wife. He had a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, and eventually had a master's degree in mechanical engineering at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So this is his, education. He started this company called Sensible Devices Inc. back in 1993. So what is that, 26 years ago, technically? Um, but the only office he held before becoming a member of the House was the judge executive of Lewis County. And after winning this position, he held it for about a year and a half before running for the seat of former Congressman Jeff Davis, which is Kentucky's 4th congressional district. He earned the endorsements of Rand Paul, Ron Paul, the general libertarian wing of the Republicans. So before we get into the good, we have to talk about the bad. And I think it's significant to mention my disagreements because oftentimes people think progressives or individuals who are, on one side or the other have a litmus test where they believe that if you disagree with me on one thing, automatically you're a horrible, evil person. And a lot of times there are gaping disagreements between me and some, politician, but if they can keep a consistency in doing something that I really like, it generally can overrule that. So, for example, I believe it was the same day that DeVos, the education secretary, was confirmed. He introduced a bill, Congressman Massie, to get rid of the education department. Yeah, non-interventionist, Dirk. That's the main appeal. He also, seeks the abolishment of the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, to those who don't know what that acronym stands for. So, those are two areas where we couldn't be any more different. And his argument for the, if I remember correctly, the education department's, removal was that he thought state governments and elected officials in those states should be able to determine the education standards for American students as opposed to people who are appointed to a position. Um, and I do agree, with that, given the fact that the Voss, who I don't think is doing a good job as education secretary, um, is someone that was appointed to that position. But I think if the person who's appointed is, someone who actually has a background in education, it can be different, or you can get a result that's not the same. So that's our main area of disagreement. But I want to go over to the various things that I like about him. Now, it was about a year and a half ago where he was the only member of the House. So out of the 420 members, the only one to vote against sanctions on North Korea. And this is coming at the time where we're already having intensified, issues with them. And you guys remember, rather you remember, Dirk, with Trump calling Kim Jong Un Rocket Man. So it took some courage to basically tell both parties, hey, screw getting pissed off and trying to punish them any more than we already have. I'm going to do my own thing, and he did. And it's kind of ironic when you look at what's happened now, where people, when they saw the Kim Jong Un meeting with Trump back in June, thought the relations were getting better. And you've had this story brewing over the last couple of weeks, and I talked about it, where the U.S., in particular, the Treasury Department, put new sanctions on North Korea. And this story went completely undiscussed by CNN or Fox or any of these places. And that's just, the point of saying that is, do not think at face value that because two people sat across each other months ago, it automatically has changed or otherwise turned into something else. Quite the opposite. But yeah, that was one of his good votes. Um, Now you also have this happened in 2017 as well. It was him. It was Amash, so Justin Amash, John Duncan, and Rand Paul and Bernie. And we know what Bernie I'm talking about. I hope you know what Bernie I'm talking about, Dirk, who opposed the bill in imposing new economic sanctions against Russia, Iran, and North Korea. It's notable because Trump actually opposed it as well. And it's kind of funny how when you actually can get Trump to not be surrounded by his little dumb neocon advisors like Bolton and Pompeo, he can turn into someone who has some sense on being non-interventionalist or just realizing that the more you pressure these various countries, the worse off you're going to be when trying to negotiate anything with them. So those five members of Congress said to the other 98 senators and what was it, 417 people, screw you. We're not going down that road. But that's a running theme. And I if I remember correctly, the first time I heard of him was when I became more aware of the Yemen scenario back in a couple of months back, where I knew what was going on, but I didn't know what people were being starved to death and bombed, and actually know the numbers relating to it. So I didn't feel comfortable discussing something I wasn't entirely familiar with. Kind of like the reason I'm going to talk about the Federal Reserve, because I want to know more about the monetary system before discussing it. But that's a whole other story. And by the way, Massie, at the start of this new session of Congress, actually introduced a bill to, I believe, audit the Federal Reserve. He went on Fox and everything. So he's been very active on domestic issues as well. I'll focus on the foreign stuff because it is the main area by which we agree. But going back to the Yemen vote, he was one of the few that was going around saying this is an unconstitutional conflict. Look at all the lives that have been lost. Very, very similar to Rand Paul's speech. I don't know if you saw it, Dirk, where he talked about, we go over there and we help out the side that supposedly is the lesser of two evils. But then if both sides suck, what's the point of even taking a side? Which is the perfect overtone for this past presidential election. It's I'm trying to see if there's anything else I want to point out in particular. He also expressed skepticism over Bashar al-Assad's role in the chemical attack in April of 2017, which I still am kind of up in the air about. But again, that goes back to his whole thing of let's not jump to conclusions. Let's not see a couple of, admittedly heart wrenching pictures of people laying dead from these chemicals before running into something we don't know the full story about. So I do that's the kind of thing that is consistent about him as you go and you look at his record, where anytime there's some bill relating to supporting a war or some conflict, it's always him who opposes it or tries to, say, hey, this is stupid. And he's right. And sometimes when I talked about Walter Jones a couple months back as being the last good Republican, I didn't know who Massie was. So I've since updated that to include a couple of other people. But it's sad because a lot of times when I criticize, some of the other Republicans, like a Ted Cruz, for example, Cruz could have the exact same beliefs on social issues, but if he were non-interventionist, like Rand or Massie or Maisie rather, I said his name. I always get his name mixed up, Massie. If he had those same kind of views on foreign policy, I would pretty much barely criticize him. And that wouldn't be because I agree with him on, let's say, being opposed to gay marriage or any of that, but it's because I expect politicians from the party that I normally am less likely to align with to not be similar to me on in a wide range of areas. But when they actually have across the board identical ideas to myself, I'm going to take what I can get, and what I'm getting from him is not a bad thing at all. You said exactly, Dirk. I don't know what you were saying exactly, too. You're gonna have to elaborate. I just want to make sure because sometimes the stream is delayed a little bit. So I'll say something and then you respond 30 seconds. Like, what did I say? Let me look around a little bit more. Yeah, you have two parties, and they're the only ones who are. Oh, here's another significant vote, and I'll get back to what you were saying. So back when the Iran nuclear deal was up in Congress, what 3 years ago, 4 years ago, Massie was the only member of the House to vote present on the agreement. He had these concerns that treaties are not ratified by the House, and that he had no authority to vote for or against the deal. Which again is another principal thing, because you're saying I don't see the office by which I serve as having the authority to vote any one way or the other on this thing. I personally think it would have been better off if he had voted for it, but I again I'll take what I can get. That's way better than voting against it. Let's see. Yeah, Dirk. He actually got a vote for speaker in the last election. So the one with Pelosi and then McCarthy, he received one vote. I don't know who it was from, but very few people are able to muster up someone to just kind of how they do that thing where they say if you vote for the person who you don't think is going to win, you waste your vote. You know how they do it with the presidential elections. That's kind of what that was, where that person felt so strongly about Massie to vote for him and be the only person to do so at this time when you have the Republicans desperately trying to get McCarthy to somehow be supported over Pelosi when there's like 40 new Democrats. So he's very good, and it's kind of sad because a lot of times, let me read what you wrote, Dirk. They are completely different. If you can find Republicans that is 10 times better than traditional Republican, yeah, that's why I oftentimes actually attract flack for discussing my liking of Rand or Ron Paul. They're people who I don't agree with on pretty much any social issue, except in Ron's case, the war on drugs, because he opposes it. But they still have a streak of constitutional responsibility, some humanitarian disgust with all these wars and the casualties that have come from them that I can respect and I can support. So another one is Mike Lee. Actually, I've mentioned him a couple of times, but I have to get around to looking at his record. He's someone that I think is pro NAFTA, if I remember correctly. But it's still one of those things where if you look at them on foreign policy, I can't get mad. And it's the thing about them you have to understand is when you're a member of Congress, you get pressured by your caucus members and sometimes the other party, but not so much, to do things that they like or to be identical to them in your votes. So, people like, Representative Massie or Justin Amash or Ro Khanna, these are individuals who, for the last couple of years, have been taking flack from their own party for doing things that they themselves don't back. I mean, Dirk, we just did this story a couple of days ago about Pago and, Ro Khanna, Tulsi Gabbard, and Ocasio Cortez being the only three of those, Democrats or representatives for the on the Justice Democrat side to vote against it. So you better believe they're under scrutiny, especially with Gabbard, not even 2 weeks later announcing she's running for president. So it is, you know, actually, I really wish that if that McConnell lost his seat next year, maybe Massie could run for that position afterward. That's the one thing I don't like about the South, politically, just in general, except for Tennessee, where every single person who gets in office has a much higher chance of staying in there because not only do they typically live longer over there, but they also have this thing about not retiring a member. And people I think should be able to vote for whoever they want. Let me say a little to Ruben, because I believe that the voters should determine term limits, which is why I'm opposed to imposing them for any position. But when you like a politician and you know they can't get into that higher position because someone is constantly in the way, like McConnell is for Massie, it sucks. I just think about that like a dream world where there's a Senator Massie and Senator Rand and whatever, just the libertarians from that one state, smashing up all these different wars. It'd be so great. And he is. Why can't the good ones get higher positions? Just like I got accused of being sexist for opposing Pelosi for speaker, and I said, put Barbara Lee in that position, get rid of Schumer and put Warren. Anybody but them. McConnell needs to be primary. Yeah, he. I don't know if it was last time or the time before that, but he was primaried, where he, I think, barely captured the vote, or he only had about 10% higher or something. No, I know at one point he was primary. I don't know if it was the last time, but I know in the last 2 or 3 times he's run, so somewhere in the 2000s, he did get primaried by someone who did end up getting a sizable chunk of the vote. Just like with that one Republican that voted against Kavanaugh, Murkowski, she was defeated in the primary. I believe it was for 2010, maybe 2016, either one of those two. And she was able to keep her position because people wrote her name, and she was the first person to win an election via write-in ballots in Strom Thurmond. So she she pulled off something that no one ever sees. Oh, don't repeat. What was that guy from West Virginia's thing? Ruben, I'm talking about, right? Blankenship, where he said Cocaine Mitch and his what family. Wow, that was a serious candidate. They're horrid. We know the futility of that thing, Ruben. But again, the problem is, even with someone like Massie, who might not be a fan of that, they're, again, because they're in Congress where they're surrounded by a bunch of yes men for whoever the party leader is, they can't come out and say it, or else they risk being, stricken by, or have some kind of reprisal pushed upon them. Just like with Ro Khanna, he surprised all of them when he said, "Yeah, primary me, have fun." So it's a never-ending cycle, and you have a couple of good people like Massie that come around every now and again. I actually I'm gonna see if I can put up the video he did, and this was forwarded to me by another person during the previous government shutdown, the one that was in, I think, February. That was a couple of hours long. I'm gonna see if I can put that in the chat room for you. It's actually really good because it explains how they used to have a series of bills they needed to get confirmed or voted and approved by a certain amount of time, and then after a while they had these omnibus where someone can hold the government hostage by refusing to vote for it or getting people to vote against it, and that wasn't a thing they were able to do before when there was a bunch of bills. So it's very informative. It's 14 minutes. So I'm going to get it right now, and I'm going to share it in the chat, and then stick it maybe in the description box too, if I remember. I have amnesia. I need help to get my memory in order. Okay, here it is. Paste, and there we go. So it's a great video. I do mean that. When the person who shared it to me actually said, "I know you're liberal," or I was like, "Yeah, but he's talking about something that is historically accurate, which is this law they passed in '74, and then the shenanigans that people put into place to mess with, or to get their way, rather, that were stopped when that law was passed about having the different bills." No problem, Ruben. I will say that, a lot of times when I would think about where I disagree with politicians, so just like how someone like Sherrod Brown, for example, who I really like on social issues, One of the votes he cast that I always hold against him is the September 2016 one, where he voted in favor of giving Saudi Arabia weapons. That's about a year into the Yemen conflict. And, people like Booker, Klobuchar, who I have no kind of high opinion of or position where I'm saying, oh, these are great people that I want for president, they voted against it. So, that's their one thing they have over his head. And I, to this day, never, forgave that, because that's someone who oftentimes seems more progressive than a lot of the people who get mentioned for president more often, and still just fails the test on that vote alone. Not necessarily, saying he's irredeemable, but that's an example of something to where, how the hell do you, vote in that kind of way when you're trying to appeal to be the other way, or a certain way rather. So it's all part of a little thing. And the other issue that people like, Massie and other figures, whether they're in the Senate or the House, have been consistent on his government spending. The only bill that Massie voted for that you actually could get some people to kind of critique him over was the Trump tax cuts, because they were talking about it adding to the deficit and whatnot. And I think, I'm trying to remember what his response was, where he said something to the effect of, I support it because of the middle class help or something. But, that's still a person who, more often than not, if you're going to have some massive, huge bill where they're trying to give, $1 billion away to whatever, he'll vote against it. Just like with Rand Paul and Mike Lee. It's kind of like how, if you look at Obama and Trump's foreign policy of bombing 7 different countries and you say it's kind of identical, but then you see a lot of the Republicans who were in office when Obama was, who criticized him over everything, but then won't criticize Trump over doing the exact same thing. They're not, just serious actors or genuine. So that's why people like Massie are important, because they actually mean what they say, or at least they have a record that goes along with what they say. So it's nice. I'm trying to see right now if he voted for. Okay, yeah. So this is something that's only important to me. The military budget, the 717 billion one, he voted against that. He was part of the, what was this, 54 people that opposed it. I'm telling you, when I look at that list and for the House, and there's all these names, I oftentimes have to remember who certain people are, or I just realize that there's a person on there who I didn't think of in the past. But he's not voting against that because he wants the military to have no money whatsoever. He knows that they're going to use those hundreds of billions of dollars to remain in every single offensive war that we're involved in, including occupying 150 different countries and having 900 military bases, and supporting over 70% of the world's dictatorships, while preaching our claims of democracy and all that nonsense, all that stuff that we claim we support, and then you actually look at our record and it's the opposite. It's kind of like when he knows there is no need to have this big of an American empire. Yeah, but like I said, Dirk, you look at that vote and you look at the vote on the Iran deal, the one on the sanctions for North Korea and the other countries, and you know that he's taking flack for bucking his own party for the most part when it comes to issues of defense and foreign policy. Hell, it's not a stretch of the imagination to think that if he, didn't have some more moderate views on uh, social issues, he could be considered a progressive. I sure as hell would rather see him as president than like half of the Democrats that we suspect are going to get into the race. Simply because I don't appreciate these wars. And it's very easy for someone to say, well, it's happening somewhere else, so it doesn't matter to me, or he's going to do this or he's going to do that. Look, if a Republican wants to get rid of the education department, or if they were ever going to be able to do that, they would have done it by now. They've had control of the House and the Senate various times over the last 20 years, and it's never happened. We just went through 2 years of Republicans controlling the White House, the Senate, the House, the governorships. We still have the education department. Hell, if Trump was so opposed to it, or if any of these Republicans were so against it, they wouldn't have even let DeVos win, or rather be confirmed to the position, because they were going to say, "What's the point of her serving as a secretary of a position that we're planning on, getting rid of?" I do hate that, like, the two departments that Carter made, everyone wants to mess with, that they have an R next to their name. The energy and the education department. Every single time, it's just those two they always want to mess with. But I'm comfortable with him having that position, because I don't think it will be implemented. And even if it were, I still would rather have that go away uh, for a few years, maybe, or possibly longer, depending on if he were in office, than to stay in all of these different wars. No one's going to die if we don't have an education department. I think people would be stupider, because schools would try to mess stuff up. But regardless, it would still, what his pros, in my opinion, outweigh the cons. Um, I think a lot of times we don't assign courageousness to people because they're not from the party that we would go to or flock to, and he's someone that deserves respect across the aisle, because you can't vote against what your party bootlicks for so often, and then not expect any kind of reprisal from the actual deep state that bends over for defense contractors. So just like how when Trump announced he was pulling out of Syria, and then he backed off on it because Bolton is apparently president now. You had Massie, not go after him, because that's how principled he is. Well, all the other Republicans, and you saw, Dirk, they were foaming at the mouth. Graham did a press conference. So when people of a certain party do something that they don't expect, they get opposition for it. And when that, a lot of times when you get bipartisan opposition, it's usually because that policy that they want you to implement is horrible. None of these Democrats or Republicans like Steny Hoyer or McConnell or any of the other douchebags that were pumping for war are ever going to have to worry about going overseas and getting blown to pieces in a conflict that's about much of nothing. And Massie knows that. That's why he's better than the rest for the most part. Yeah, Graham is the chief warmonger. Graham's another one of those Republicans where it's just like, you want to give people credit for stuff, because McConnell, if I did another stream on him, I would talk about some of the good things that he once was for or once did. That's how long he's been around, where he's just had this complete metamorphosis to where there's actual things he did that were decent. Dirk said it's now normal to be for war as a politician, which is the worst. Massie is moral. Yeah, but here's the thing: politicians don't run on war. They run on social issues to get people all amped up and angry about someone taking those away or doing it the way they don't like it, so that when they get in office, they can kind of sometimes maybe follow up on that, but also give you this imperialistic America that you never thought you were going to see. Same thing. Look at the Tennessee Senate race. How many people that voted for Blackburn, the woman, the one that one that had that was so insane that Taylor Swift had to become political, and even that didn't work? How many of them do you think voted for her so that she could vote in favor of continuing Afghanistan or Syria or Yemen or Pakistan or Libya or any of the other countries that we've bombed or continuing to occupy? No one did. Not a single person, probably. I'd be willing to bet not a single. You could go and look up. You could go and ask all of her voters in that state, all million and whatever of them, and not a single one would say my principal thing I wanted her to do was continue bombing all of these different countries and supporting, these different military conflicts. So that's how they're able to get in office. They take this really important issue, war and peace, and they completely pretend doesn't even exist. That's why when Pelosi gave her midterm speech, the speech that she gave after the Democrats were confirmed to take back the House, she said that the Democrats would strive for bipartisanship and peace. And we knew she wasn't talking about getting out of the wars, because she's talking about bipartisanship, and you can't have that with the majority of Republicans, the ones that aren't like Massie and actually are terrible all around, um, because they are for all of these different wars. So he's great. I hope he runs for Senate or gets some higher position in the future. Uh, and like I said, I'm not so invested in what I believe in that I can't give people credit for at least meeting me halfway there. And being a non-interventionalist who consistently speaks out against those things, no matter which party is in office, is more than halfway. He is a solid 65 or 70% of what I'm trying to get out of most of these different members of Congress. And it's nice to see one have such morality, other than a couple of the ones I've mentioned before. So, thank you. Have a good night. See you tomorrow.